It's wildlife biologist Eric Orff with New Hampshire Fish and Wildlife. You know, I often, and this is July 1st, 2019, I often go back and look at my diaries from the year before or 2 years ago and just check to see how my garden did last year or what the birds were doing. Well, so yesterday I was glancing at my diary to see what I was doing around this time, and I took the Wayback Machine back to 1996, which was a very memorable day, a very long day. In fact, the first words at the top of the page was a very long, long day. You see, it was around 4 a.m. or shortly thereafter on that Tuesday, July 2nd, 1996, that my phone rang a little after 4 a.m. And when I picked up the phone, it was, I think it was the Coast Guard informing there had been an oil spill down on the Piscataqua River in Portsmouth, near which feeds Great Bay. Now, I had been working since 1988 in the Fishing Game, New Hampshire Fishing Game Department's Region 3 office in Durham, and had spent quite a bit of time even before that on the coast on different projects. And I worked in the majority of the folks in the Durham office, obviously, were the marine biologists, with a couple of us from the wildlife division. So I quickly got dressed and headed for the coast, because we'd had some training in oil spills, and not knowing, you know, I just was told that there was a tanker tied up to the docks in Newington, and a pipe had come loose or broke and spilled an unknown quantity of oil into Piscataqua River right there in Newington. So down I went, and I headed for, before I left the garage and went out to get into my fishing game vehicle, I grabbed an extra box of 12 gauge shotgun shells. So right then and there I was thinking, all right, we will get an oil spill, so what do I have to do? Well, if I can find the spill and there are gulls or terns or ducks near the spill, I'll fire some shots, not at the animals, but enough to scare them away. Yeah, I had been assigned years before a weapon, part of my fishing game duties. So unlike the law enforcement folks who wore their sidearm for personal protection and to I just deal with bad people, I was assigned a 12 gauge Remington pump shotgun to deal with animals that were injured or were sick, so that I could humanely dispatch them. And I'd killed a moose or so, and some rabid raccoons, and also the shotgun was able to fire some what we call cracker shells. They were a shotgun shell that fired a firecracker, so you could kind of dissuade maybe a bear that was in a campground or in a situation. Rather than try to catch it or tranquilize it, you could simply move it out of the area. So it had a variety of purposes, as shotguns do, for scaring animals as well as killing them. Well, today I grabbed the extra box of shells and headed down to Adams Point, where the Marine Division kept their maritime skiff. It was an open boat, maybe 16 feet long or 17 feet long. Not a big boat, but so at the crack of dawn, I think around 6 a.m., I got on the bay, on Great Bay. This was tied up right at the junction of Great and Little Bay down at Adams Point. And I think Cherie Patterson maybe had joined me by then. So we headed off down to Piscataqua and looking for an oil patch that might be floating. And but as we headed down into the Piscataqua River past the docks at Newington, where the tanker, the ill-fated tanker, I think it was called the Providence, had left, but we could see on the buoys as we passed, there was a black line on the buoys and on boats as we passed, but we really didn't see a big amount of oil, no big amount of oil. And in fact, we went all the way down to Portsmouth, down to the mouth of the river, and I could see the ship anchored maybe a half mile or a mile out in the ocean. So we went out and kind of went up to the vessel, and I took some pictures, and that was kind of my job. I figured that day, if I didn't see oil birds that needed to be picked up, I was there to document what happened. So I had my camera in hand as well, and I was shooting images for much of the day. So we looked for any animals in distress, and luckily we found none. And as it turned out, the oil that was being transferred to the shore was a very heavy oil. So the unknown quantity actually sank to the bottom of the Piscataqua, And later on, John Nelson, who happened to be he was the chief of the Marine Division at the time, he joined us in the boat as we cruised around Piscataqua up into Little Bay, and we happened upon Ed Heafy, a local lobster fisherman who was pulling his pots right there just off Fox Point and in Little Bay. And some of the lobster, as he was saying, were sort of covered with this tar-like substance. So apparently this oil was turning into, maybe globs of oil, and the tide is in the current in the Piscataqua and Great Bay is something to behold. It's like an 8 or 9 knot current. So I spent much of the day documenting where I could find oil, talking to folks to see what they've seen, and Cherie and I documented what we could for evidence. And I guess I worked through the morning from whatever, a little after 5 a.m. to early in the afternoon. But and then the long day was to continue, because I had an appointment to go up to Lyme in the afternoon. And I'll tell you about that in maybe the next video, about the part of the long day of July 2nd, 1996, where I responded to an oil spill. And Fish and Game has done training. They do every year or two, training on how to handle oil birds, how to pick them up, how to clean them. At the Region 3 office in Durham, there are some material there that would use to scrub the birds, to clean them. There are trailers around with oil booms, and I know every 2 or 3 years they have a drill down on Great Bay. So Fish and Game is very keenly involved in the potential for an oil spill on New Hampshire's seacoast, in particular Great Bay. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that and to unfortunately witness a spill, but it didn't seem, other than the boats that were contaminated and things like that, as far as I know, it never had any major impact on the fish and wildlife in the Piscataqua or Great Bay system. But I certainly am always concerned, as is the New Hampshire Fishing Game Department, about the potential for an oil spill on Great Bay.